Are you considering transferring your real estate into a limited liability company? Well, beware, because banks are looking to accelerate mortgages. In this video, I'm going to show you what goes wrong and what you can do to prevent a bank from accelerating when you transfer property into an LLC. All right, let's get started. Okay, so here's the issue. When you're transferring your investment real estate into a limited liability company, there's a real chance that if the bank discovers that transfer, they may accelerate your mortgage, and that could prove disastrous for you as a real estate investor. Now, what am I referring to? Come on over here and I'll show you what we're talking about. Okay, so here's what we're looking at here. Let's assume that you bought an investment property pre-2022. So that means you're probably sitting down here at one of these lower interest rates on that mortgage. And ideally, we want to keep that lower interest rate. But the problem is if we transfer that property into the LLC and a bank discovers the fact that there's been a property transfer and that mortgage has not yet been sold to Freddie or Fannie, they can accelerate. And what that means is it's going to push you up here into one of these higher interest rates because you're going to have to refinance the property. Now, I don't want to see this happen to you. Unfortunately, real estate investors are starting to realize the effect of making these property transfers and not doing it correctly. They're leaving a trail that alerts banks to the fact that property's been transferred. Now, we want to avoid that. Let me just show you what's been going on here. So, here's the first example. This individual received a letter from U.S. Bank indicating the bank had notified that the mailing address differs from the property address. So what typically occurs when a property is transferred into a limited liability company, many times the individual who made the transfer or bought the property subject to an existing mortgage will contact the lender and inform them to change the mailing address for the mortgage statements. Now, that is not something you want to do. Do not contact the mortgage company and tell them to change the address because that's going to set off a red flag in their system. As what has occurred here, this set off the red flag for this individual. The bank reached out, contacted the individual investor and said, hey, we notice there's a mismatch there. The address, the statements are no longer going to the address of the original borrower. Therefore, we have a problem with this. You need to provide us all this independent verification, Long story short, the bank is now accelerating this mortgage because of the fact this property was transferred into an LLC. Now, another way in which banks can find out you made a property transfer is when it comes to the insurance on your property. So when you transfer property into an LLC or business entity, what you're going to do then is change your property insurance because you have to list the entity as an insured party. Now, what's been going on is when people are transferring their properties into LLCs, they're calling up their insurer and they're saying, hey, change the name insured from my name to the LLC. Now, as you can see here in this one, it says the name on the homeowner's insurance policy we received for this account does not match the name in our records for the loan documents. So when they changed that insurance policy over and listed their LLC as the named insured, it prompted this letter from the lender to be sent out to this investor. And again, this is another situation where the lender is looking to accelerate the mortgage because they got in at those low interest rates and now it's at a higher interest rate. So this gives the bank an opportunity. So what do you want to do here? So when you transfer your property into a limited liability company, when you contact your insurer, do not change the named insured over to the LLC. Instead, list the LLC as an additional insured under your policy. So it'll still get picked up under the policy, but when the bank sees a copy of the policy, the name will no longer change. You'll still be listed as a named insured, so it won't set off any red flags. Now, obviously, if these things concern you about moving property into a limited liability company because you have one of those lower interest rate loans and you don't want to risk lender acceleration, then I would suggest you set up a land trust and transfer your property into a land trust because in those situations, the bank's typically going to see that as a transfer for estate planning purposes and they're less likely to contact you and discuss possibly accelerating if you made a mistake and you changed the insured over to the name of the trust or the mailing address changed. So a lot of times if you do want to change the mailing address, what I would tell people is to list that you're changing the mailing address for tax purposes only. Send a letter and say, we'd like to change the statements to come to this new mailing address. We're doing it for tax purposes only. This could get you beyond that first letter problem that I showed you. But by and large, banks are on the lookout for these things, so you have to be extra due diligent when you're transferring your properties in your LLC so you're not putting yourself in this type of situation. All right, guys, so transferring properties into LLCs can have a detrimental impact on your mortgage if it's not done properly. As I stated, if you want to do it in a safe manner, I highly suggest you consider using a land trust. I got plenty of videos on my channel. I'll put a link to one of my better land trust videos in the show notes that you can click on, watch that, and I'll give you an idea, if you're not familiar with land trust, how to set one of these things up. If you want to learn more, I invite you to come to my live one-day tax and asset protection event where we talk about land trusts, entity planning, transfer properties into limited liability companies and trusts, how to avoid the due on sale clause, and we cover taxation. And more importantly, this free event that you can attend, you're also going to learn about taxation when it comes to real estate and how to make sure that you're really reducing your taxes through real estate investing down as low as possible. And you'll get all your questions answered because I bring a team of professionals with me to the event who's going to sit there and they'll answer upwards of 1,200 questions per event to make sure we're taking the concepts that I'm describing and applying them to your individual situation. I hope to see you there.